The wine soured in my mouth before I swallowed it. Not because it was bad. It was probably the kind of bottle people bragged about for years after opening. The kind of bottle that came out of a locked cellar and was handled like a religious artifact. But the second Charles Vance opened his mouth, it turned to acid on my tongue, and I knew I would remember that taste for the rest of my life. There are moments that divide a life in two. Everything before. Everything after. That Friday night was one of them. There were 20 people seated around that table, and every one of them had the polished ease of people who had never been told no by life. A state senator sat on my left. A shipping magnate sat on my right. Across from me, 2 women with old family names and perfect posture spoke softly about board appointments and charity galas as if the whole world existed to be arranged and inherited. And at the head of the table sat Charles Vance. He didn't just sit there. He ruled from that chair. That was the first thing people misunderstood about men like him. Money was never enough for them. They needed a room to bend around them. They needed silence when they breathed. They needed everyone present to understand, without being told, whose gravity they were living under. He was a big man in his 60s, silver at the temples, a face carved by authority and years of never being challenged to his face. The kind of man who made a habit of speaking as if every sentence deserved to be written down. And across from me, 3 seats down, sat Chloe. The woman I had spent 2 years loving. The woman whose family had never once truly seen me. I had done everything right that night. I wore the right suit. I answered questions with restraint. I smiled through the little cuts disguised as conversation. Where did I grow up? Where did I go to school? How long had my company been operating? Was it stable? Was it still in its early stage? Did I enjoy the uncertainty of entrepreneurship? That last one was asked with a smile. It translated to, how does it feel to pretend you belong in rooms built by serious people? I let it pass. I had let all of it pass for months. Maybe that was my mistake. The conversation turned, as these conversations always do, to virtue. Wealth likes to dress itself in concern. One of the guests mentioned a foundation initiative for disadvantaged youth. Someone else praised the city's efforts. A third person talked about mentorship as if they had personally invented compassion. I said something simple. I remember that part clearly because of how small it was. I said kids need one real chance. Just one. One person who does not write them off before they even know who they are. That was it. That was enough. Charles lifted his glass, set it down harder than necessary, and looked at me with a smile that was not a smile. Let's not romanticize this, he said. The room dimmed around the edges. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way some people look at a stain on a clean shirt. We can fund programs. We can support causes. We can even feed strays if we feel generous. But we do not confuse charity with belonging. No one moved. Not a fork. Not a breath. I felt every eye at that table sharpen and turn. Charles did not stop. That, he said, pointing his fork at me without even pretending it was accidental, is what people keep getting wrong. A son may embarrass himself. A daughter may rebel. Fine. That happens in every family. But there is a difference between a phase and a place. You do not bring street history into legacy spaces and call it sophistication. You do not seat a man with no real family, no real name, and no real pedigree at a table built by generations and expect the room not to notice. Street history. No real family. No real name. He kept going because no one stopped him. Because men like that mistake silence for agreement. You may be polished, he said. But polish is not origin. A borrowed suit is still borrowed. Manners are mimicry if blood does not support them. And some doors should remain closed for the health of the house. The thing about humiliation is that it arrives in layers. First there is the shock. The body does not understand it yet. It only knows something has gone wrong. Then there is heat. Then cold. Then a ringing in the ears. Then the terrible awareness that other people are watching you become smaller. I looked at Chloe. I wish I could tell you she stood up. I wish I could tell you she threw her glass at the wall and told her father if I left, she left. I wish I could tell you the woman I loved chose me at the exact moment it mattered most. She didn't. She stared at her plate. That was the real injury. Charles was only exposing what was already in the room. Chloe was confirming it. The silence went on so long I could hear the chandelier tremble when the air kicked on. Charles smiled again, slower this time, more confident. Look at him, he said to the table, not to me. He knows. That's the tragedy. He knows he's in borrowed light. Something inside me became very still. Not broken. Still. My name is Julian Thorne. I was 34 years old that night. I had spent most of my life being underestimated by people who thought pain made you less, not sharper. I had been hungry as a kid. I had slept in state housing. I had learned young that adults could fail you and still sleep just fine afterward. I had worked jobs that left my hands raw. I had built my company out of a freezing garage with a laptop that overheated every 3 hours and a folding table I found beside a dumpster. And now a man born into chandeliers was trying to tell me what a real name was. I did not raise my voice. That surprised him. I took the napkin off my lap, folded it once, and placed it on the table. The movement was so small it made everyone lean in. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and looked straight at him. Thank you for the meal, Charles, I said. And thank you for the clarity. The room held its breath. It's useful, I continued, when a man is willing to introduce himself this honestly. You could feel the shock move around the table like electricity. Charles's face tightened. He had expected anger, not control. Rage he could dismiss. A scene he could own. But calm is hard to dominate. Calm makes cruel people hear themselves. I turned and walked out. No speech. No final showdown. No shattered glass. Just the sound of my shoes on hardwood and 20 wealthy people choking on the fact that the man they had just watched being cut open had somehow left with his dignity intact. Outside, the night air hit me hard. The Vance estate sat above the water like old money carved into stone. The driveway was lined with cars that cost more than the first building I ever rented for my company. My own car looked almost insulting among them. That was part of why I kept it. It reminded me who I had been before people started calling me successful. Before contracts. Before boards. Before headlines I never gave permission for. I had my hand on the door when I heard Chloe behind me. Julian, wait. Her heels slipped once on the gravel. She almost lost her balance and caught herself. By the time she reached me, she was breathless, her face pale, one hand pressed to her chest as if she were the one in pain. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to do that. I looked at her for a long second. Sometimes the end of love is not dramatic. Sometimes it is just clarity arriving all at once. He called me garbage, I said quietly. And you said nothing. Her eyes filled immediately. He was drunk. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was so weak. He was cruel, I said. And you were quiet. Don't confuse those things. She reached for my arm. I stepped back before she could touch me. You know how he gets when business goes bad, she said. The merger, the pressure, the debt, the board, all of it is crushing him right now. This isn't really about you. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not when her father insulted me. Not when the room went silent. Right there. In the driveway. When she tried to make my humiliation part of his stress management. He told an entire room what he thinks people like me are, I said. And you're asking me to be understanding. I'm asking you not to make tonight bigger than it has to be. I stared at her. There it is, I said. What? The part of you that still thinks this is his world and I'm lucky to be near it. Her expression changed then. Hurt first. Then fear. Not fear of me. Fear that I was seeing too much. That's not fair. No, I said. What happened in there wasn't fair. Tears slid down her cheeks. She whispered my name like it could still stop something. If you respected me, I said, you would have walked out with me. She had no answer for that. I opened the car door. Julian, please don't do this. I looked past her at the mansion rising behind her in the dark. All that stone. All that inherited certainty. All that wrought with a polished surface. I'm not the one who did this, I said. Then I got in the car and left her standing there in the sweep of the headlights. The drive back to the city was long and black and quiet. That kind of quiet is dangerous. It leaves too much room for memory. By the time I crossed into downtown, I had already replayed half my life. The smell of bleach in group homes. Metal bed frames. Cheap institutional blankets. Social workers with tired eyes and careful voices. The first time I understood that adults could speak about your future like it was a damaged thing, already limited, already reduced. I remembered being 7 and realizing nobody was coming. That realization does something permanent to a person. It either hollows you out or it hardens you into something difficult to kill. I remembered stocking shelves overnight. Washing dishes. Waiting tables. Taking college classes when I could afford them and pretending I wasn't exhausted in every single one. I remembered counting quarters for gas. I remembered eating instant noodles for 4 straight days because a textbook cost more than groceries. And I remembered the first prototype. That mattered more than any insult ever would. Because that was mine. Years later, when Nexus Dynamics began to move from brilliant idea to dangerous company, people started asking the wrong questions. They wanted personality. Visibility. The founder story. They wanted magazine covers and conference appearances and clean origin mythology. I gave them none of it. I built layers between myself and public attention. Proxy leadership in negotiations. Strict confidentiality. A structure that allowed me to own, direct, and control without becoming a spectacle. I did not want to be famous. I wanted to be effective. That decision had made my life easier. It had also allowed people like the Vances to make fatal assumptions. I never lied to Chloe. Not once. I told her I ran a tech company. I told her it was demanding. I told her I valued privacy. She saw my habits, my clothes, my car, my reluctance to perform wealth, and decided I must be moderately successful at best. Her family saw foster care on a background report and stopped reading. That's the thing about arrogant people. They don't investigate. They confirm. By the time I reached my building, the anger was gone. What replaced it was colder. I went upstairs, loosened my tie, stood in front of the windows, and stared out over the city until my reflection became clearer than the skyline beyond it. Then my secure phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Sarah Lynn had been with me for 6 years. Officially, she was my chief of staff. In reality, she was the kind of operator every serious company needs and almost none deserve. Disciplined. Lethal under pressure. Incapable of panic. Loyal to results before ego. There were maybe 4 people on Earth who could tell from my breathing that something had changed. Tell me, I said. She didn't waste a word. Vance Energy just pushed for Monday close. Their legal team wants signatures at 9 a.m. They're desperate. The debt stack is worse than they disclosed in the early briefings. If we don't wire on schedule, they may trip obligations before Tuesday. I looked out at the city and said nothing. She continued. The board thinks they're trying to strong-arm timing because they're out of options. We can still proceed if you want, but if there's any reason to delay, this is the moment. There are moments in business when the personal and the strategic collide so cleanly it almost feels scripted. This was one of them. Charles Vance had humiliated me in his own house without knowing he was insulting the one man who could decide whether his company lived through the weekend. I should tell you I wrestled with it. I didn't. Not then. Kill the deal, I said. Silence. Then, are you certain? Yes. The termination fee is ugly. I know. They won't survive the open if this gets out. I know. I heard her exhale once, very softly. Then the keyboard started. Reason? I turned from the window and set my glass down on the counter. Cultural incompatibility, I said. Toxic leadership. Breach of values. And send the notice directly to Charles. His personal account? Yes. That's a message. That's the point. She didn't ask another question. Done in 10. When the line went dead, I stood there for a while in the silence of my own home and thought about what I had just set in motion. People love revenge in theory because they imagine it comes with fireworks. In reality, serious revenge is administrative. It is signatures, timing, language, access, and leverage. It is knowing exactly which brick to remove from a wall so the whole structure cracks under its own weight. I slept better than I expected. The next morning, I made my own coffee. It was bad coffee. Cheap. Bitter. Familiar. I had never lost the taste for things that reminded me I had once needed every dollar. By 8, my phone was lit up with missed calls from Chloe. I ignored them. Not to punish her. To preserve the one thing that matters most after betrayal, silence. Once people lose access to your immediate reaction, they start hearing themselves. At 8:30, my building security called upstairs. There's a woman in the lobby demanding to see you. Victoria Vance. That got my attention. Chloe's mother had always been more dangerous to me than Charles in one specific way. Charles enjoyed domination. Victoria specialized in containment. Charles exploded. Victoria curated outcomes. She didn't want conflict. She wanted tidiness. She wanted problems handled before they left marks. Send her up, I said. 5 minutes later, the elevator opened and she walked into my apartment like she was entering a room beneath her standards. Cream suit. Diamond studs. Expression ironed flat. One hand wrapped around the handle of a handbag that probably cost more than my first year's rent. She took in the apartment with one sweep of the eyes, and I could see the miscalculation happen in real time. This was not a struggling founder's rental. It was the home of someone who owned choices. Julian, she said. I'll be brief. That would be refreshing. She did not smile. She reached into her bag, removed an envelope, and placed it on the counter between us. There is a cashier's check inside for $100,000, she said. You will take it, end this relationship, and disappear from my daughter's life. No drama. No scenes. No more calls. No emotional performance. I looked at the envelope and then back at her. You came here to buy a breakup. I came here to solve a problem. And I'm the problem. Let's not be childish, she said. My daughter has been infatuated. It happens. But we both know this relationship has no future. You know it. I know it. Last night simply made that unavoidable. She leaned in slightly. This is more money than men from your background usually see in a clean form. Take it while dignity is still possible. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about her. Not just that she despised me. That she had reduced my entire life to a statistical category in her mind. Poor background. Aspirational attachment. Transactional motive. Easy exit. I picked up the envelope. For half a second, I saw satisfaction in her face. Then I tore it in half. Not dramatically. Not wildly. Just once. Cleanly. Then again. Then again, until the paper and the check inside were in pieces on my counter. I dropped them into the trash. Victoria stared at me like she had just watched a dog speak fluent Latin. "You are out of your mind." "No," I said. "I'm just not for sale." Her face hardened. "You should have taken the money. You should have kept it." Something in my tone made her pause. She narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that your family is going to need liquidity." For the first time since walking in, she looked uncertain. "What have you done?" That was the wrong question. "What has your husband done?" I asked. She left without another word. And that was when the weekend truly began. I wasn't in the Vance house, but I didn't need to be. Between industry contacts, legal chatter, and the kind of information that starts leaking the second wealthy people smell collapse, I got a clear picture. Charles received the termination notice late Friday night. He did not sleep. He called lawyers, bankers, board members, and anyone he thought still believed his voice carried weight. By Saturday morning, the performance of control was gone. His son Wyatt found out next. If Charles represented old money's arrogance, Wyatt represented its decay. He had all the confidence of a man who had never built anything and all the recklessness of someone who thought consequences were for staff. He had leveraged himself against the company's stock in ways only entitled idiots do. When he learned the deal was dead, he panicked exactly the way weak men always panic, selfishly and fast. He wanted out. He was ready to dump shares, short his own family's company, and protect himself before the market learned what was coming. So while Charles was screaming about legacy, Wyatt was calculating how to survive the fire by pouring gasoline on it. And Chloe? Chloe was calling me. Over and over. I did not answer. By Sunday afternoon, one thing had become clear. If I did nothing else, Monday would destroy Vance Energy. At first, that had felt acceptable. Then I opened the full due diligence files. This is the part people misunderstand when they fantasize about corporate revenge. They assume the winning move is always the cruelest move. It isn't. The winning move is the one that leaves you able to look at yourself afterward. For 6 months, my team had been reviewing Vance Energy from the inside. Debt exposure. Infrastructure weakness. Supply chain obligations. Hidden liabilities. The usual ugliness of a company pretending to be healthier than it is. But late Sunday night, deep in the confidential ledgers, I found something worse than incompetence. The pension lines didn't reconcile. At first, it looked like sloppiness. Then it looked like concealment. Then it became what it was. The company had been pulling from employee retirement reserves to shore up cash pressure elsewhere. Quietly. Illegally. Repeatedly. Charles Vance was not simply a cruel rich man. He was stealing from workers who had given decades of their lives to his company. Men and women in their 50s and 60s. Technicians. Plant operators. Administrative staff. People who stayed late, worked weekends, missed birthdays, swallowed stress, and trusted that if they gave the company their best years, the company would not gut their old age to protect the boss's lifestyle. I sat back and stared at the screen for a long time. That changed everything. Until that moment, this had been personal. After that, it became moral. If Vance Energy collapsed completely, Charles would lose his empire. But the workers would lose far more than status. They would lose time they could never earn back. That was when I stopped thinking about revenge and started thinking about seizure. I did not want his company ruined anymore. I wanted it taken. By dawn Monday, the strategy was done. Not a merger. Not a rescue. A forced acquisition under conditions so brutal he would either surrender control or face criminal exposure with no shield left. The market opened at 9:30. By 9:31, the stock was in freefall. The termination leaked. Analysts piled on. Financial news networks lit up. Talking heads started using words like instability, insolvency, governance failure, confidence crisis. Which is the polished market language for blood in the water. Wyatt's trades accelerated the collapse. Exactly as I expected. At 10, Sarah patched through an unrecorded inbound call. Elijah Thorne, she said. No relation. Just an unfortunate symmetry. Elijah was Vance Energy's chief financial officer. The public face of discipline behind Charles's chaos. I took the call. His voice sounded like a man who had not eaten or slept and had finally accepted that loyalty was not going to save him. I know who you are, he said. That told me two things. 1, the inner circle had figured it out. 2, the panic had reached the point where secrets were now liabilities. He didn't waste time. He told me he had warned Charles months earlier. He told me the pension moves had escalated when the debt worsened. He told me he had backups, deleted emails, transfer proofs, and internal directives. And then he said the sentence that told me fear had finally outrun pride. If the company dies today, he's going to pin it on me. There it was. The last loyal man at the table realizing he was just meat in the end. What do you want? I asked. Protection, he said. For the employees. And for myself. Bring me everything. 1 hour. I'll be waiting. At 10:45, Sarah called again. This one you'll enjoy, she said. Try me. Charles Vance is downstairs. I stood up. How angry? Loud enough to make reception regret their career choices. Bring him up. To your office? No. Conference B. That room had glass walls, direct eastern light, and climate control that never quite kept up after 10 in the morning. By design? No. Useful? Absolutely. I watched him on security feed while he waited. The man who had looked like a king at the dinner table now looked like a man being pursued by invisible dogs. Jacket off. Tie loose. Sweat darkening the collar. Phone in hand. Pacing. Stopping. Swearing. Pacing again. Powerless men do not become humble immediately. First they become frantic. I let him sit there for 32 minutes. Not 30. Not 35. Long enough to feel ignored. Not long enough to recover. Then Elijah arrived with the drive. It was worse than I expected. Everything was there. Transfers. Directives. Concealment chains. False reporting pressure. Direct knowledge. Direct intent. I put the drive in my desk drawer, took the acquisition file, and headed for Conference B. When I opened the door, Charles turned so fast he nearly lost his footing. For half a second, he looked relieved. He thought I was there to witness his eventual rescue. Then he saw I was alone. What are you doing here? He demanded. I'm waiting for the CEO. I closed the door behind me and walked past him to the head of the table. That chair mattered. He understood that instinctively. I sat down. He stared. It is difficult to describe the exact expression on a man's face when his worldview begins to come apart. It is not just shock. It is resistance. The mind refusing to accept what the eyes are telling it. He looked at me, then at the room, then at the badge on my lapel, then back at me. No, he said. I folded my hands. Sit down, Charles. He didn't move. You, he said. You work here. Yes. His eyes jumped to the insignia again. Then to the file. Then back to me. His voice dropped. In what capacity? I held his gaze. In the only one that matters. He took one step back as if distance could change facts. This is some kind of stunt. No, I said. What happened Friday night was a stunt. This is consequence. His face lost color. You're telling me. I'm telling you, I said, that the man you called a stray is the founder, majority owner, and chief executive of the company you have been begging to save yours. He sank into the nearest chair. Not gracefully. Not like a patriarch forced into temporary discomfort. Like a man whose knees no longer trusted him. He looked older all at once. That was the first truly satisfying thing I felt all day. Not joy. Recognition. He was finally seeing me at scale. Julian, he said, then corrected himself. Mr. Thorne. Friday was a misunderstanding. No, I said. It was a confession. I was under pressure. So were the children in the system you called street history. He flinched. I had too much to drink. And not enough character. His hands tightened together. This has nothing to do with business. It has everything to do with business, I said. You built a company the same way you built your family. Through fear, entitlement, and the belief that worth is inherited. You look at people and see category before capability. That is not a private flaw, Charles. That is a management doctrine. He tried a different angle. Think about the employees. That was when I opened the file. I slid the pension documents across the table. He looked down and stopped breathing for a second. One glance was enough. He knew. What is this? The end of your room for denial. He said nothing. You stole from workers, I said. Not metaphorically. Not broadly. Literally. You used their futures to cover your failures. His lips parted. No sound came out. That company was dying because you would rather cannibalize loyal people than admit weakness. He rubbed a hand over his face. I can explain. You can confess. He looked at me with the hunted expression of a man trying to calculate which kind of ruin he preferred. So I gave him the terms. Nexus acquires Vance Energy today, I said. Not as partner. Not as equal. As owner. $1 per share. Emergency stabilization, pension restoration, debt containment. In exchange, you resign immediately. No severance. No board seat. No advisory role. No graceful statement about stepping down to spend time with family. You walk out with your name and whatever is left of it. His head jerked up. $1? Yes. That destroys my equity. You destroyed it. He actually slammed a hand on the table. I built that company. I leaned forward. No, I said. You inherited it. And then you hollowed it out. The room went very quiet. He stared at me with a kind of hate so pure it was almost clean. For the first time, I think he understood that no performance would save him. No old habit. No raised voice. No moral appeal. No mention of Chloe. No reference to family. No money. No threat. He was not in a room built for him anymore. He was in mine. You have 10 minutes, I said. Then the drive goes to regulators and prosecutors, and you spend the rest of your life explaining to a federal court why you thought refinery workers should fund your denial. He broke slowly. That's how real collapses happen. Not in one dramatic shout. In fragments. First, the shoulders soften. Then the eyes stop challenging and start searching. Then the voice loses its edge. Then the hands become old. He asked for his lawyer. I told him his lawyer was already in the hallway. When the door opened, David came in first. Then Elijah. Then Sarah remained just outside with security behind her. Charles looked from face to face waiting for solidarity. He found none. David put the documents down without meeting his eyes. The board has voted, he said. Emergency authority has been granted. We are proceeding. Charles turned to Elijah. You traitor. Elijah did not blink. I was loyal to the company, he said. You were loyal to yourself. That landed harder than anything I'd said. I slid the resignation letter across the table with a pen. Sign. He picked it up with a hand that trembled visibly. He read the first line twice, as if the words might rearrange if he stared hard enough. Then he signed. There are signatures that create empires. And there are signatures that prove a man has finally run out of lies. This one did both. I took the papers, handed them to David, and stood. Charles did not. He stayed sitting there for a moment, staring at the place where his name had just been reduced to ink. Then he pushed himself up and turned toward the door. Use the freight elevator, I said. He stopped. Pardon? I straightened my jacket. We keep the main lobby clear for people who belong in this building. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. Maybe from shame. Maybe from rage. Maybe because hearing his own logic return to him in a colder voice was finally too much. Security escorted him out. By afternoon, the acquisition was public. Financial networks reframed the story instantly. Collapse becomes transition the second enough money stands behind a solution. The stock stabilized. Analysts praised decisive intervention. Commentators called it bold, ruthless, visionary. Which was fine. Let them use whatever words made them comfortable. What mattered was simpler. The workers' pensions would be restored. The company would live. Charles would not control another day of it. Around 3, Sarah buzzed my office. Chloe is here. I said nothing. She used the guest code you gave her. That hurt more than I expected. Not because she got in. Because it reminded me there had been a version of my life where I thought she belonged there. Send her in, I said. When she entered, she did not look like the woman from Friday night. No designer dress. No perfect hair. No effortless poise. She looked like someone who had not slept and had finally seen her family without lighting. She stood near the door for a moment as if unsure whether she was allowed to cross the room. Then she said my name and almost broke on the first syllable. I offered her a seat. She sat carefully, like someone visiting the scene of an accident. I know everything, she said. Do you? My mother came to you. Yes. She told me what she offered. I waited. She swallowed. I spoke to Wyatt. He was drunk enough to tell the truth for once. Then I heard the rest from people who still work for my father. The stock. The fraud. The pensions. The board. Everything. She looked up at me. I didn't know. I believe you. That made her cry harder. I should have defended you, she said. Not because of who you are. Because of what was right. And I didn't. That was the first completely honest thing she had given me since this began. I was scared, she said. Not of you. Of losing everything familiar. I thought if I kept quiet, the night would end and I could fix it later. But that wasn't loyalty. It was cowardice. I let her say it. Sometimes people need to hear themselves tell the truth before they understand its weight. She wiped at her face with the heel of her hand. I loved you. I know. Did you love me? Yes. That answer seemed to hurt her more than if I had said no. She nodded slowly. Is there anything left to save? I walked to the window and stood there for a moment before answering. No. She looked down. She already knew. When I turned back, I kept my voice gentle because cruelty would have been cheap, and this was no longer a war. You need to learn who you are without your father's gravity, I said. And I need a partner who doesn't discover my worth only after the room changes. She closed her eyes. That's fair. No, I said softly. It's just true. We sat with that. Then she stood. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad it was you. I understood what she meant. Better me than vultures. Better someone who had known hunger than someone who only knew acquisition math. Take care of yourself, Chloe. She nodded and left. That was the end of us. The first month after the takeover was brutal. Not exciting brutal. Not cinematic brutal. Operational brutal. Meetings before dawn. Labor reviews. Debt restructuring. Forensic accounting. Emergency retention packages. Pension restoration. Public messaging. Legal containment. Executive interviews. Plant visits. Culture triage. It turns out it is easier to take a company than to heal one. Vance Energy was full of people who had spent years learning how to survive a bad regime. Some had become excellent. Some had become obedient. Some had become dangerous. My job was to figure out which was which before the wrong people adapted faster than the right ones. At the first all-hands board session, I stood where Charles once sat and looked at the room long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Good. Comfort had cost that company too much already. The old rules are dead, I told them. Your last name means nothing here. Your school means nothing here. Your family's reputation means nothing here. Competence matters. Integrity matters. Work matters. If you cannot function without hierarchy as a narcotic, leave now and save us time. No one moved. So I moved first. I called Wyatt's name. He had survived the first few weeks by hiding behind title complexity and other people's noise. Men like him always think systems will protect them if they can look expensive enough while standing near them. I put his attempted short activity on the screen. Time-stamped. Traced. Undeniable. The room went silent. He started talking immediately. That was his mistake. It's almost always a mistake. He blamed advisors. Timing. Misunderstanding. Broker automation. Confusion. I let him finish. Then I fired him. No severance. No ceremonial wording. No softened exit. Just truth. You tried to profit from the destruction of your own company while employees were about to lose their future, I said. You are too weak to lead and too selfish to keep. Security will help you remember where the door is. He left cursing. No one defended him. That was useful. Fear had been the old management language. I needed people to understand that consequence now had a different shape. Not arbitrary. Not personal. Earned. Then I promoted Elijah. Not because he had been perfect. He hadn't. But because when the line finally appeared, he crossed it toward truth instead of survival. Sometimes leadership is not about finding flawless people. It is about finding people who recognize the cost of silence before it is too late. The real test, though, was not the boardroom. It was the plant floor. 3 weeks into the transition, I flew to Texas and walked one of the largest facilities in work boots and a hard hat. No press. No staged cameras. No polished rollout theater. Just direct conversation with the people who had the most to lose and the least reason to trust me. They looked at me the way workers look at executives who visit after a crisis, with folded skepticism. Good. They should. I stood in front of them near the machinery and told them the truth. Your pension money was touched, I said. It never should have been. We found it. We restored it. We locked it. And if any executive in this company tries anything like that again, they won't need to worry about keeping their office. They'll need to worry about explaining themselves under oath. Nobody clapped right away. That was the moment I knew I still had a chance to earn them. A man in the front, maybe late 50s, face lined by work and weather, looked at me for a long time and finally asked, "Are our jobs safe?" There it was. The real question beneath all questions. Yes, I said. And not just safe. Necessary. Something loosened in the room. Not celebration. Relief. Which is often more sacred. We did not save that company by pretending it was still what it had been. We saved it by admitting what it was and then changing it faster than the damage could spread. Old divisions were restructured. Green infrastructure accelerated. Failing assets were repurposed. Training programs were funded. Middle managers who treated labor like a disposable cost line were removed. The smartest engineers, many of whom had been ignored for years because they lacked pedigree, suddenly had capital, authority, and room to work. The company stopped bleeding. Then it started building. Over the next year, the market rewarded the recovery. Of course it did. Markets love moral language only after it proves profitable. But the numbers were never my favorite part. My favorite part was quieter. It was the emails from employees whose retirements were intact. The letters from families who no longer thought a layoff notice was coming. The fact that people who had spent years bracing every time senior leadership spoke slowly stopped looking afraid in hallways. That matters. More than headlines. More than panels. More than magazine covers I still turned down. As for Charles, his fall was less dramatic than people expected and far more humiliating. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was thorough. Asset freezes followed. Friends got scarce. Invitations disappeared. The men who once praised him in private clubs started talking about him in the past tense before the legal process was even finished. Victoria filed for divorce with astonishing speed, which surprised no one who had ever really looked at her. Wyatt vanished into another state and tried to begin again among strangers who had not yet learned his name the hard way. That family had spent decades worshipping status. Then one bad season revealed that status is not structure. It is weather. 2 years later, I stood on the balcony of our headquarters one winter evening with a cup of coffee in my hand and the city spread below me in cold light. I thought about that dinner often for the first few months after it happened. Then less. Then almost not at all. But that night, for whatever reason, it came back clearly. The chandelier. The silence. The look on Chloe's face. The way Charles said the word stray as if he had invented it and owned its meaning. He was wrong. That word does not mean worthless. It means unclaimed. And there is a difference. Some people are born inside walls so sturdy they mistake protection for superiority. Others are thrown outside those walls early and learn things comfort never teaches. How to read danger. How to build without certainty. How to keep moving when no one is coming. How to survive shame without making it your religion. How to become strong without becoming cruel. That is what Charles never understood. People like him think lineage creates value. It doesn't. At best, it preserves it. At worst, it protects the incompetent long enough for them to confuse inheritance with merit. The people he looked down on were the very people who kept his world functioning. The workers. The builders. The assistants. The operators. The drivers. The engineers. The ones whose names never made the invitations but whose labor made the chandeliers possible. He called me street garbage because he thought origin decided rank. But origin only tells you where the story began. It says nothing about who had the spine to finish it. I looked over the city for a long time that night and thought about how many people had probably swallowed insults in rooms where they knew they were being measured by things they never chose. Their names. Their accents. Their schools. Their families. Their clothes. Their scars. Their silence. If you've lived through that, you know the temptation is not just to win. It is to become hard. And there's a difference between hard and clear. Hard people break what touches them. Clear people know exactly where to cut and exactly where to spare. That was the lesson I took from all of it. Not that revenge is sweet. It isn't. Not really. The sweetest part was never watching Charles fall. It was making sure the people beneath him didn't have to fall with him. That is what made the whole thing worth carrying. Not that a cruel man finally met a wall. But that the wall had a conscience. And if there is any justice in this life, maybe that is how it should be. Not mercy without consequence. Not power without memory. But consequence in the hands of someone who remembers exactly what power feels like when it is pointed the wrong way. I finished the coffee, set the cup down beside the balcony rail, and looked up at the lights still burning in offices across the tower. Inside those rooms were people working late. Planning. Building. Solving. Earning tomorrow the hard way. People Charles would never have seen clearly. People I never would stop seeing. And standing there above the city, with the wind cutting through my coat and the glass behind me reflecting a life I had built from almost nothing, I realized something simple. He had been right about one thing. I did come from outside their gates. He was just wrong about what that meant. It didn't make me less. It made me the man who knew exactly how to open them. Final notes on why this rewrite is stronger. This new version is stronger than the original in 4 important ways. First, it is less repetitive. The original often stacks multiple adjectives and repeats the same emotional point 3 different ways. This version keeps the emotion intense, but tighter. Second, it is more believable. Charles is still monstrous, but his cruelty sounds more like elite contempt and less like cartoon villain dialogue. That increases trust. Third, it gives the hero more controlled force. He feels less like a fantasy avenger and more like a disciplined man with pain, memory, and strategy. Fourth, it gives the ending more meaning than revenge. That is important for long-form retention. A story that only punishes burns bright and fades fast. A story that punishes and reveals a moral truth stays with people. If you want, I can do either of these next. Turn this into a strictly formatted 11 Labs ready performance draft with light emotional bracket cues only, or turn it into a chaptered 60 to 65 minute YouTube narration script with exact section timing targets minute by minute.